episode 24 of the Connect the Dots NYC podcast. Yep, we're almost at 25, and honestly, the momentum is unreal right now. This one's going to be good, guys. I can feel it. Today, I interviewed a global homelessness leader who works on international systems, change efforts, focusing on data policy and large-scale program design through the Institute of Global Homelessness. So, without further ado, thank you for joining me today, and let's get started. Julia Wagner is a program director at the Institute of Global Homelessness, where she leads major initiatives including the Vanguard Program, the International Mayors Council on Homelessness, and the Global Homelessness Data Map. She has over a decade of experience designing programs, building partnerships for systems change, and making data more inclusive and useful for decision making. Before joining IGH, Julia worked as a monitoring and evaluation technical advisor with the AIDS Free Project, collaborating with teams across multiple countries to measure and improve outcomes. Her background also includes work in Namibia and South Africa through the Peace Corps, where she focused on youth empowerment, continuum of care networks, and community-based initiatives. Julia holds a master's degree in public policy and management from Carnegie Mellon University and a bachelor's degree in molecular and cellular biology from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Her work sits at the intersection of data, policy, and practical solutions to homelessness. Thank you so much for joining me today, Julia Wagner.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Amazing. Great to have you. I want to start with your background and your career path. So what originally drew you to your work on homelessness and global systems change?
Throughout my career, I was kind of a generalist moving through the fields of education, public health, and homelessness. So one of my first jobs in Chicago was working in the intersections of homelessness. I worked with people at the Chicago Public Library, helping have access to public assistance, to Social Security benefits. And I also did job training, how to use the internet to access jobs, how to build a resume. And so I worked with both unhoused populations and people that were coming to the library for just kind of to access the internet. And so it was a mix of populations, but it also kind of gave me really saw the power of libraries in kind of building community, and then also how, having access to the internet and access to kind of what was back then 20 years ago, kind of newer ways of kind of accessing jobs. And so it was great to kind of be based at a library, being able to help people, and then also kind of getting a greater understanding of the services, the gaps, and kind of the needs of people in the community as well.
And like I'd mentioned, your academic background started in biology. How did you end up moving from biology into public policy and homelessness work?
So when I went to university, one of my main interests was biology. So I majored in biology and minored in chemistry. And I was thinking of becoming a doctor. So my dad was a nurse for 30 years. And so that was one of my main interests. But as I was, entering my junior year, I realized that I didn't have I had a great interest in biology and things, but I didn't have the passion for to go through 3 years of medical school. And so I decided that wasn't the career for me. And so both in high school and in college, I was interested in kind of like more global issues. And so my next step was just to join the Peace Corps after college. And so that kind of helped ramp up my career in both education and public health. I lived in Namibia for 2 years, and I was a science teacher, biology teacher, but I also taught English, and I worked in partnership with the teachers to kind of do different programs. And so that kind of helped really shape the rest of my career path. And I loved living in the very small village I did and like work. I was a teacher for 2 years, and so it was a great experience.
And as you mentioned, you've worked across multiple different countries. So how does homelessness look different globally compared to the US?
I think, with my work specifically with the Vanguard Cities program, we work across 18 communities. And so we really see that there's like a through line of, the causes of homelessness can be very similar across communities. You know, right now we're experiencing a cost of living crisis. And so housing prices across the world are growing. And unfortunately, because homelessness is a systems issue, that means homelessness is growing in a lot of rural and cities across the world. And so, even though the context is different, kind of the policies and things, cities can learn from each other globally. And, there's many cities experience the, an increase in migration, and the national governments don't have policies to address that. And then also with climate change and things, there's many things that cities can learn from each other. I think as I said, context is differently. So, for example, we work in Mongolia, and because of climate change, people that were um, traditional farmers, due to really heavy snows, they lost a lot of their cattle and their herds, and so they moved into the the central cities, and then also ultimately to the capital, and so that really led them to a lot of housing precarity. And so we've talked with the national government there about ways to kind of think about prevention to support farmers and herders, and to kind of keep their traditional livelihoods, and then also work with the more the towns, and to intervene first before someone's much more vulnerable on the streets of Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia. And so I think there is that rural to urban migration in India, Argentina, in Argentina specifically in Buenos Aires, because of the economic crisis. People are moving to the city, but they live on the outskirts of the city, and then they come to work, and then sometimes then they, unfortunately, because they're not able to access a job with a livable wage, then they families or individuals become homeless on the streets of Buenos Aires. So in Argentina, um, as well, there's different cities that have policies, but for our work, we have a partnership with the city of Buenos Aires. In Australia, and like similar to Canada, the housing prices are so high that it's really pushed people to be unable to afford rent, and it's also made it difficult for homeless services to be able to house people in the city center. And so housing is more available on the outskirts, or not, or kind of the housing allocations have reduced, causing strain, and kind of you know making thinking about housing solutions more still possible, but more difficult. And then across the world, but like in Chicago, in the UK, there's also people that are migrants from other countries, and so and then they're looking to come to their areas. And so like in Chicago, we received over 20,000 people that were migrants, and so that the city adapted a one system to kind of deal with the crisis. But now that it has gone down, because people have moved down and found jobs, found housing, and so the city is kind of thinking about next steps, and is in the process of launching a new city plan. So across the world, homelessness does look differently, but like we do see those common themes, and there's similar policies, thinking about prevention, thinking about different housing solutions that are threads throughout.
Wow, and that global experience is truly commendable. And I want to ask you, with all of these similarities, although, there may be differences and there is this through line that you mentioned, are there any misconceptions that people often have about homelessness on the global scale?
I think, in the United States is unfortunately a current example of that. Like there's been a much more push that homelessness is a individual responsibility, and that governments don't have a major role in doing so, and that it's more focused on the stigma and of substance abuse and things like that. And people do experience substance abuse, but if when you look at the causes of homelessness, you understand that how systems, poverty, racism, um, you know unequal access to social protection systems, and then difficulties accessing the housing market, not having a livable wage, that tremendously drives homelessness. And we see it in the data that when those things exist, people are much more likely to experience homelessness. And so from our work, we think about those systems, and then how to drive change, instead of kind of and and kind of working on national policies and local policies to do so. And we do see the effects, because you know putting stigma um, and make it spreading misconceptions, that's not going to end homelessness, and it really compounds the issue, and leads to much more damaging policies like criminalization and things like that. And we know from our work with throughout the world that criminalization um, you know doesn't doesn't impact the problem. It doesn't lead to lower numbers. It pushes people further to the margins. They're less likely to trust people. They're less likely to access services, and it just makes homelessness a more difficult problem to address. And it also compounds the trauma on people that are just trying to be a part of the community, and to be able to kind of have access to services. And so with our work, we try to work with cities and national governments to kind of understand, you know, what are the drivers, how can they can work like based on respecting the individual autonomy of people, thinking about the rights of people, and then trying to design a system to, you know, fulfill the community, and also to ultimately end homelessness and criminalization and stigma, and driving those misconceptions has no part in that.
And one thing that you mentioned towards, the middle of your answer was that criminalization is something that, you know, the US does in sort of a belief that it will get rid of homelessness, but you've seen on the global scale that it does nothing but push people to the margins and exacerbates the problems. What are some other lessons or things that the US needs to learn from other countries in terms of dealing with homelessness?
I think from when we're kind of seeing where um, what is working throughout the world, what is the global evidence base, we really see the importance of prevention. Um, with the United States, there are programs to intervene. There's rental assistance programs. There's programs to support some tenant protections. But I think when you're thinking about vulnerability, it's much in a lot of communities, and for a lot of people, it's much easier to become homeless than people in Australia or people in Finland. They have systems in place to have several barriers to someone becoming homeless. But if in the United States and in some other cities throughout the world, if you lose your job, if you don't have a good social net or family network, then you could you if you're not able to pay your rent, you could be evicted, have an eviction history, and then kind of struggle with recurring homelessness. And so when you think about prevention, um, then you kind of work upstream to understand, what are people that are at risk, but also what are universal prevention systems that need to be put in place. Affordable housing, rent stabilization, how to continue to build housing to make it, so that it is affordable for people that are working at um, different types of jobs, and also truly affordable, because a lot of times social housing and other types of housing, or uh, rental vouchers, they're put at a certain level, but people that are working minimum wage jobs, that they still might not be able to afford rent. And so what are child what are kind of ways to support families to have unemployment benefits, and then also to support people to kind of have legal assistance in kind of navigating the system, and make sure that if you are experiencing discrimination or different types of racism, that in kind of accessing housing, that you receive support. So we really see the power of prevention in you know being able to reduce homelessness. If you're not focusing on prevention and you're just focusing on the crisis and the management, then unfortunately people are going to continue to become homeless, and you're not um, really focusing on the what's causing homelessness, the drivers, and really working to close those gaps and support people so that they are housed. And we see that it's much more effective, and it's also more cost effective to prevention programs they cost less money than homelessness, and that you reduce the trauma and kind of the need for support for people as well. So I think in the United States, thinking about how we improve our social services, and then thinking about how we, really think about the drivers of homelessness and how we can move to stop them.
And something Andrew Henning had mentioned, and he was the person I interviewed in my last episode, was that the current homelessness infrastructure and industry is almost like an emergency room, and that
Mhm.
we are dealing with it sort of after the fact that people become homelessness, and then doing our best to like sort of bring them out. And just like you had mentioned, and it's been a through line throughout sort of current modern day media related to homelessness, and also this podcast, that prevention is what is necessary, making sure people don't fall into the circumstance rather than trying to figure out how to pull them back out. And one thing that is both, very important to your work, but also the homelessness work in general, is data and data collection. And so I was wondering, how does data and the collection of data sort of fold into this desire to be preventative and take care of people before they fall into homelessness?
So, you know, data is an important part of any city or country's response to homelessness. It makes you understand the different populations that are experiencing homelessness and kind of the resources that are required. But you know, if you have the right questions and the right kind of data in place, you can understand why are people becoming homeless, and then design programs to address those gaps. And so um, we really work with cities to have actionable data and for them to be using data regularly to inform those programs. And so if you look at your data and you see that you have a large amount of people that were formerly in the prison system and in the carceral system, then you know that you need to kind of bring in the carceral system to design programs and figures. If you see that you have a lot of youth in you're experiencing a lot of youth homelessness, you have a lot of younger people, then you can design programs to work with schools, to work with social workers to kind of to strengthen those family ties and to also have systems to support youth coming out of foster care or different things, because we know that youth is a very important population to work with, because if you experience youth homelessness, then you're more likely to experience chronic homelessness later. And so it's important for to intervene early and to have programs to fit the needs. And I think, with data, it's also important to understand that, you know, no person or group is a monolith, and you need to have targeted services and really person centered services. And so data is a method to design those, to understand the at risk groups. But then, it's the responsibility of the policies and programs to work with the person individually. So, for example, in Greater Manchester, they have a program to work with youth, and so they started with just kind of having a case manager, but then kind of in talking with youth and understanding more of the qualitative data, they understood that they needed to do much more on housing to kind of help stabilize youth that were at risk, and so they brought that dimension into their prevention program. And so I think data is definitely such an important tool, but it's also you need to have the qualitative piece, talking with people, having their feedback, and also bringing diverse stakeholders involved. So when you're designing your survey tools specifically for youth, they might be much less likely to trust a surveyor. So like if you think about how you collect data, hopefully you would have like a peer support worker or someone that has had the lived experience, or is a someone that's younger, to kind of really help design the questions, inform the questions, and then also answer the questions with, or like be the survey taker, so that the data is much more reliable. Because if you're kind of designing questions and things in a vacuum, your data is not going to be as reliable. So kind of thinking about how to bring the community, how to bring people with lived experience, how to make sure that the questions are really informed by your clients, and then making sure that that you design programs that you use the data as well. So data is such an important piece, but it really kind of builds from the people that you work with and your clients as well.
Wow, I mean, not only is data collection so important, but there's so many, guidelines to making sure that you're doing it well, to making sure that you have inclusive data and that your data is, a good representation of the population and that it is actually helpful to future growth. You had mentioned previously, obviously with Greater Manchester, but that just you had worked with cities in general in terms of helping them through data collection, and data is such an important part. However, with all of these guidelines and trying to, collect data in the best way, what are some of the common mistakes you've seen cities make when trying to collect data that may have led to its misuse, misrepresentation, or being not as effective as it could have been?
I think the data collection is never perfect. And so I think when IGH, we have the global homeless data map. So we look to understand data collection across countries and kind of understand how countries are collecting national data. And we know from, specifically for homelessness, because, some, like, for example, women are more likely to experience hidden homelessness. And so there needs to be methods to collect that. And then also the current methods that a lot of cities enact, like point in time counts, they're just like a 1 day snapshot. And so, they are big, massive undercounts. And so we really see, you know, working towards better data as a journey. And so, if some cities, they start with a street count, making sure to understand hotspots and working with the community to kind of understand where people are experiencing homelessness and to kind of build your methodology based on that. So I think a mistake could be not working with the community, not working with lived experience, both to design survey tools and to kind of understand the scope of where you need to do it, but also, um, you know, not kind of the perfect data is never going to be possible. So it's really about making data as reliable and accurate as possible, but also understanding that there are going to be shortfalls. And so I think cities shouldn't wait until the data is perfect before they use it, and they should also not kind of you know data that's kind of informed by the community and but being used is such so much important as we talked about. So I think making sure that it's as accurate as possible is important. I think and part of that is building really comprehensive survey tools, building in disaggregation and kind of things to understand the at-risk groups, and then making sure it's inclusive and informed is important. But data is never going to be perfect, so working towards to make it better and better, but then also just making sure that it's actionable, we see as really important as well.
And obviously, one of the main points of data is to create this sort of buzzword that we've called systems change. I mean, previously you had mentioned that one of the biggest misconceptions between among people is that homelessness is an individual issue. What it's not. It's a systems issue based off of the policies and the infrastructure that's been created in a country or community. However, the word systems change has been used many times in the media and in previous podcasts. And I want to hear what your definition of the, sort of buzzword systems change is and what does it really look
So I think, yeah, it is a buzzword, but it also like a process that many cities are kind of trying to understand is how to change their systems to really increase the impact and enact change. And as we kind of talked about, and as previous guests have talked about, a lot of cities and a lot of governments are kind of still in the management crisis mode of homelessness. So there's still a lot of focus on, or a singular focus on shelter and emergency accommodation, and you know crisis has an important role in homeless systems. It saves lives, but it's only going to be managing the problem, and it's not going to lead to sustainable change. And then also, oftentimes shelters, people, especially large scale shelters, people feel unsafe. And so, and it's not meeting people's needs. And so when you think about systems, you need to think about the whole system, because homelessness is such an intersectional issue, how to bring different departments in, education, health, and how to kind of share the responsibility and bring an urgency to the issue, and then understand, how do we shift our systems to more focus on prevention. Like, how do we bring in the people, the police, and work with them to, you know, not criminalize homelessness, but like understand and support assertive street outreach. How do we bring in different housing, like public housing, and then also affordable housing providers, bring in nonprofits who are doing the work, and then also, focusing on the singular goal of ending homelessness. How do we kind of change how things are done to, to have specializations, but also to make sure that people are changing their focus from kind of the crisis to slowly build towards more sustainable solutions of, a balance between, focusing on prevention, but then also providing housing and other housing-led solutions for people that are currently experiencing homelessness. Because we know from looking at the system, when you're focusing on managing the problem, you're still you're still paying for prison beds. Your shelters can be incredibly expensive to run. But then, yeah, in talking with other cities, they understand that, if we, instead of a shelter bed for a family, or then if you provide rental vouchers, it's the same amount of money or a less amount of money, and the outcomes are better. So thinking about outcomes, thinking about how do you design systems that are built on the evidence base, and working across sectors to kind of accomplish that is kind of how we see effective systems change. But it's difficult, it can be messy, there's a lot of egos and things, and so communication, having a clear plan, having a ambitious goal that, and for government to bring an urgency and a dedication to it is so important as well.
Yeah, and systems changes is what we're all sort of striving for in this industry and in our movement to sort of limit, mitigate, and hopefully eventually get rid of homelessness. However, you know, cities are working towards systems change. Cities are obviously getting better. There's growth that has been seen and that you've been a you played a part in creating. However, what is one of the main sort of hindrances to cities when trying to implement long-term homelessness solutions?
I think when we talk with cities, post COVID, there's a lot of pressures on cities, and so there's not always the immediately accessible budget for it. And so, we work with a lot of cities across contexts. And so, we really see the importance of political will to kind of have that dedicated budget. But then oftentimes nonprofits are kind of doing the work when governments are not currently acting. And so I think, um, yeah, I think, there's a misconception that homelessness is not solvable. And so kind of some cities are kind of uh, accepting like shelters and things are the status quo. And also, it is a complex issue. It is a changing issue, and so kind of continually adapting policies to do so. And as right now, it's a housing crisis is very difficult, but we do see that homelessness is rising in cities and kind of responding to the crisis. A lot of cities are, because of the housing crisis, almost 20 years ago, there's still kind of that huge deficit in the amount of social and affordable housing that's been built. And so cities not right now are trying to address the issue. And so that is like a current challenge. But we see, like, for example, in Minnesota, they developed a affordable housing plan over 10 years ago, and now they're seeing the benefits of that. So for cities that are making change, it's about kind of finding that balance of focusing on the long-term solution of how do we build towards more affordable housing, how do we build so that everyone in the community has housing that they can access, and also kind of think about how do we design prevention initiatives and work to support people that are currently experiencing homelessness. So it is a difficult process, but having a clear plan, as we said, bringing all the partners together, and then having mayors who are dedicated to the issue. Like, for example, like, we've seen homelessness decrease in our mayors council cities, where mayors have brought urgency to the issue, um, have you know have worked towards housing and other initiatives, and had a dedicated budget. The whole community benefits when that happens, but it does take dedicated support and everyone working together, including the city leadership.
Yeah, and that's definitely been something that is common among, you know, the people working in homelessness. That what we need right now is sort of unity in our work. We need people to come together, people, across, emergency staff, people, on the political chain, people who run nonprofits. Everyone needs to come together and sort of coalesce into one body that together we can deal with homelessness. Because when trying to deal with it separately, we're almost harming each other and making it proportionally worse for everyone else when we can't just come together as one unit and really work on homelessness together. Now, we've talked a lot about, and the majority of this podcast has been about, how is homelessness being dealt with the world and what has your experience been like? But I do really want to focus on the work that you're doing. And so one of the projects that you're running is called the Vanguard Project. And so what is it? Why does it matter? And what is it trying to do?
So um, at IGH, we have three strategic priorities. And so the first one is focused at our work on the global level for policy and advocacy, specifically at the UN. And so to kind of support member states and everyone and global stakeholders to, you know, include homelessness on the global agenda. And really, what really powers that work is our work with cities across the world. And so currently, we work with 18 cities across all six continents. And so IGH supports them on their work. Each city that we work with sets an ambitious goal to reduce or end homelessness, and then also has qualitative goals to support the coordination work, the building in quality data as well, and supporting building in partnerships with lived experience and making sure that the community is engaged. IGH, we started the Vanguard Cities program in 2017 with 13 Vanguard cities. And so we really saw the importance of city leadership and, you know, um, for cities to use the global evidence base and to adapt that into their work. And so the cities are the experts in their context. They're doing, and, they're driving their work in the city. And then IGH is kind of building this global community and supporting with evidence-based technical collaboration and bringing the cities together to learn and also like learn through challenges and kind of share what works, barriers, and things like that. And so um, for this, we really tried to have a proof point that homelessness is solvable across the world and to, bring all of the cities together to support their work and to, continue to build this global community.
And you mentioned that you tried to create a proof point that homelessness is truly solvable. And, that is, very, very commendable, especially among the sort of right now within the homelessness community. There is this sort of negative light on the fact that homelessness is solvable. Some of the guests that I have interviewed, have said that, it's possible to limit and mitigate it, but with the current trajectory of where we're going, solving it is sort of a near impossible issue. How did you go about creating that proof point and really trying to establish that it is true and homelessness is solvable?
We've, for homeless, if you look globally, you have seen that countries are able to significantly reduce homelessness, with policies and with for our cities, we also had a 2022 evaluation. So to look, it was an independent evaluation to look across our cities and see what's working. And many of our cities did experience reductions in homelessness over the 5-year span of the evaluation. And so, what the evaluation looked at is kind of what are the key enablers and barriers. Right now, there is, a kind of a decision point within homeless services. We see governments, for example, Finland previously was one of the kind of the proof points, and homelessness is solvable. But right now, the government has slowly um, repealed some of their affordable housing and social protection systems. And so, for the first time, homelessness has increased in Finland. But I think if you look at the long term political will, then and the policies that were in place, you can see that they focused on prevention, they focused on affordable housing, and they focused on housing first, and they were able to reduce homelessness. And in cities and other contexts, focusing on you know assertive street outreach, moving people off the street, really working in partnership, having political will, and we're like thinking about how housing is accessed and working to simplify that and make it, streamline entry into services as well. We have seen reductions, but unfortunately, in some of our vanguard cities and across the world, there are increases in homelessness because of external factors, and governments are continually committed to ending homelessness, and that's still our message because we still see it possible, and in the cities we work that they are able to make significant changes, but it is more difficult in the current context as well.
And what sort of policies or interventions have you seen make the biggest impact in your cities or just on a global scale?
I think when we talked about, how you need a coordinated approach, so having a lead agency to coordinate that, to kind of think about how priorities should align and kind of and balance together. So having that coordinated approach, as we talked about, prevention is one of the the largest things that cities should kind of think through to close that gaps and work upstream and kind of think about the how they can um, work at different approaches. So universal prevention, working with at-risk groups, working to support people that are immediately at risk of losing their homes, and then also working to kind of make sure that there's not repeat homelessness. And so stopping the cycle of people moving in shelters, coming back to the street, and thinking about how to have sustainable, long term, rare, brief, and non recurring, as as people say. And so yeah, in the evaluation, which I can share or link to, there's kind of the several top line things of prevention, coordinated approach, moving away from large scale shelters to having temporary supportive accommodation, housing first, making sure people have access to incomes, um, and also moving away from a one size fits all to kind of a targeted approach to specific people, person centered approaches. The evaluation saw that criminalization, as we know, doesn't work, that people need to have access to social services. So, support. And so limiting restrictions to access services and supporting people to have access to IDs. And then also um, thinking about um, acro- from the evaluation, which came out in 2022, all of our cities were not focusing on prevention. So that's something that we focused on as far as our work with IGH is how do we think about the individual context and then also help supply that as well. And so we've kind of used the evaluation, and then we've also to inform our work. And then we recently published last week with a case studies of kind of the work from across 11 of our Vanguard cities and what they're doing along these lines of housing first. So, for example, we featured Lisbon and Santiago, Chile's housing first programs, Greater Manchester's prevention program, which I talked about. Sao Paulo, Brazil has a modular housing units for families, and so we kind of featured some case studies of featuring best practice from across the world as well.
I always like to include, a couple of ending questions to these podcasts that are focused on two main things. And so the first one is the media. One of the main things that we've seen in this sort of up and coming generation and in the past couple of, I would say 5 to 10 years as well, is the importance of the media in sort of global impact and global change and just trying to do something on a real world scale. And now the media narrative in homelessness is very varied and split across many different people. There are people who are, such as Mark Horvath, who are very vocal about, their opinions on homelessness media and how we need to change the media narrative from what it is now to something slightly more impactful. I was wondering, what do you think that we need right now in the media to really create change in homelessness and push for that sort of next level impact and that next steps that we need to take?
Yeah, I really commend the work of Invisible People and Mark Carville because you can see the power of kind of spotlighting best practices, spotlighting voices of lived experience, and kind of and really building a movement to drive that. And the media does have a tremendous role, and also I think youth like you and kind of using their platforms also has a tremendous role because unfortunately, there are many um, stereotypes and things that are spreading that are not true, which is damaging public support. And when communities are looking to introduce a new housing initiative or things that the one of the main barriers they experience is NIMBYism. So people that they support homeless services in general, but they don't want it in their backyard. And so for people to understand that people that are unhoused that are experiencing homelessness are their neighbors, and that also when you build a housing project in your community, it's not going to damage your it's going to improve it, not and from what we've seen across the world, there's a lot of resistance up front, but once it's established, then that almost universally goes away. So I think the media has a power of sharing the stories of what works, sharing successes, and then also, working to counter narrative, the misconceptions and the stereotypes that different governments and also different people are spreading. And so, you know, we need real solutions to ending homelessness. We need more urgency towards the issue. And I think the media has an important role in driving that and kind of really sharing that, there are success stories and there is a lot of challenges, but what is the way forward as well?
Yes, sharing stories and making sure that the media is pushing a narrative that, you know, helps the homelessness community and helps us deal with this issue, is definitely something that I think is common among the whole industry. The second thing I like to sort of conclude these podcasts with is a little bit of like personal insight and slightly sort of lighter questions. And so the first one is, what was the most surprising thing that you've learned in your career dealing with homelessness?
Um, I don't I don't know if I've have everything that's like surprising. in my career. I think what really drives my work is the community and the people that we work with. They're such activated leaders, and we at IGH just do our best to kind of spotlight and support them. So I think what I was surprises me is their is their drive and their ambition, and people that are able to kind of you know there's such burnout, rightfully so. There's not enough access to kind of support for people in the field. There's a lot of setbacks, and I think like people that drive my work are people that are leaders that kind of see through the trees for the forest, and then also really continue to do the work. So I'm I yeah, I like to be surprised by the genuine compassion, empathy of leaders, including, people people that are of lived experience activists, and then also people in city leadership that are making changes. So I think that those are good surprises that I look for, and also kind of keep me focused on the work as well.
And for people in the sort of up and coming generation who are trying to get interested in homelessness, trying to do their part, what is your advice? What is your guidance for them?
I think there's a role for everyone. So depending on your skill set, you can do an enact change. So if you want to work for in and around homelessness intersections, there's so many ways to work towards housing, work in data, work in social policy, work in technology. We're really seeing how AI and different things can drive the work, and also make sure that it's being used specifically for good. So I think we in in this scenario, we need a lot of new ideas and innovation, and I think that can be a tremendous amount of youth, and also just to kind of for students to do the research, understand, and then also bring their experience as well. So I think having the having new people kind of really bring their drive and ambition would really support the work. So I think there's tremendous possibilities for them to do so.
And lastly, looking ahead, what gives you hope that homelessness can be solved or will be mitigated in the next, years, decades, and in the future to come?
I think even though we see homelessness on the rise, we also see that there's more with our work globally. There's more countries that are willing to really focus on it as an issue and really understand how they can address it. For example, in Europe, they have the Lisbon Declaration, which hopefully aims to end street homelessness by 2030. That's an ambitious goal, but that is that goal for countries to meet and kind of think about how to address. I think from our work with cities, it brings me hope that they're willing to join us and commit to their work. And then I think for activists like you and for other people in our network, we really we have a lived experience council at IGH to support lived experience activists and to really center their work. And I think from the different communities, as I said, the leaders, the activists that we work with, um, their their drive and ambition gives me hope. And so I think, and also that since I'm a data and evidence person, I know from looking at globally that we do have the answers, and with kind of coordination with with collaborative work, we can work to drive it. So that also gives me hope as well that you know there is the data to really drive the problem. We just need to do the work to address it.
Well, coming together, unity, making sure that we are, one body dealing with homelessness, whether it's on a community level, a city level, or even a global level. That is definitely one of the main takeaways from this podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today, Mr. Wagner, and I really appreciate you sharing your experience and your wealth of knowledge.
Well, I really appreciate the time to kind of talk about IGH's work, the work of our Vanguard cities, and kind of to share the expertise of the people that we work with. And so I invite you to kind of look at the work IGH does, look at what our Vanguard city partners is, and feel free to reach out to me where I was looking for partnership and collaboration from across the world. So thanks so much.
Thank you.